Okay, you're live.
All right. Good afternoon. My name is Rhonda Devine, and I'm with the Office of Finance and Operations, Division of District Support, Branch Manager for the Student Tracking and Data Branch. Joining me today, I have our Associate Commissioner, Robin Kenny, our Director, Donna Duncan, our Associate Director, Jesse Carlton, our Executive Advisor, Matt Ross, the Funding and Reporting Branch Manager, Che Ritter, along with members from my branch, Angie Mcdonald and Josh Whitlow. Today's meeting, we will have that recorded, and we'll also have the questions and answers document on our webpage under the KDE website, Student Enrollment tab, COVID-19. Okay, next slide, please. In today's discussion, we're going to cover funding, logistics, variable calendar, and then other considerations for attendance tracking, home hospital, and then healthy at school. Our Associate Commissioner, Robin Kenny, will discuss the funding and logistics. I'm going to turn it over to her, and when she is finished, we'll open it up for questions for Robin. Okay, next slide, please. Thank you.
Thank you, Rhonda, and it's a pleasure to be here with DPPs this afternoon and to talk a little about a question I'm sure is hot on your mind because I've heard from my staff lots of good questions that are coming in. We're going to talk a little bit today about attendance and funding, and really in the context, if I can back up for just a minute and kind of set the context for this. If you can think about all the way back to March, which right now seems forever ago, but if you can go back to March and think about when we moved from a situation where we had all of our students in our classrooms and they were receiving instruction from our teachers in early March, and then we quickly moved to a new environment where we had all of our students in a remote learning environment where they were learning from home under a non-traditional instruction model. So we finished out the school year in that way, and sincere appreciation that we say every time that we talk with our district staff about the good work that all the staff in the local districts did to accomplish that under a very short time frame, food service being delivered. You all really just didn't miss a beat. And you did that with the context of not really worrying so much about the funding at that time. It was really just to keep those students engaged in instruction happening. So Senate Bill 177, which was passed by the last General Assembly, they came in and kind of advised us on how we would get through the remainder of that school year from a funding model for SEEK and ADA and what that would look like. And many of you may have worked along with your finance officers to make that selection of how to finish out that last school year in either choosing data that was collected for 18-19 or data that was collected for 19 and 20. And that became the basis by which we will achieve funding for you as you start the school year in the fall. However, we know that this discussion doesn't stop there because you're getting ready to start school again. And when we start school again, we have to go through those same questions about how we will do attendance and how will funding then be calculated based upon that school year for the subsequent school year. So we know that you're always thinking a year behind, you're thinking about the year you're in, and you're thinking about the year ahead. So as we've been having these discussions, because Senate Bill 177 will actually expire, it expires with the school year that we just finished. So we're back to the, quote, I'll say the normal way that we usually do things when it comes to attendance and funding under our current statutes and regulations. We already know that instruction's not going to look the same in the fall. We've been talking with you and your local school districts about different models that might work best for your parents and students and your community. And we know that some people will be some of your students may be in person, some of them may be at home, and you're providing that remote instruction, and you could have any of those combinations throughout the year. All of that, of course, is dependent upon the coronavirus pandemic and what happens along the way, whether we have spikes, whether things get better, and really choices of our families. Families at home are going to have to make some decisions. And I know many districts are actually surveying your families and communities about parents and families sending kids back to in-person school. Our goal, of course, is to make it as safe as possible and mitigate those risks for our students and our staff, very important. But we still expect that there will be a certain segment of the population that still want to keep those students at home. So we know our current model doesn't work for attendance and funding. So we at the department, in discussions with our local school districts, have come up with some kind of goals that we would like to keep in mind as we think what might be the best way to tackle attendance and its impact on funding as we start the school year. Those goals are set forth on the slide. We want our one goal is to make it temporary in nature. We are very hopeful and cautiously optimistic that we'll only have to do this for 1 year. And then maybe we return to our more ordinary, normal way of attendance and funding in the future. So temporary in nature so that it only is for 1 year. It needs to be explainable. So it's important. We know that how we do attendance and how we calculate funding and how SEEK works is already complicated. So any changes that we're going to make, we'd like it to be easily understood and explainable. It needs to be flexible. As we've talked about, not only might you start school in a certain way, you need to have a guidance that will last throughout the school year. So we don't want to start and say, let's do it this way, and in the middle of the school year have to change everything. So it needs to be flexible to sustain whatever changes that you're making for instruction. It needs to be predictable from the standpoint of you may not know exactly how many dollars that you would receive, but you understand the components of what you need to do to achieve those funding levels. And then ultimately, major goal, we don't want to create something that would either incentivize or discourage a decision at your district of either going in person or remote instruction. We want that funding to kind of be neutral. We want you to make the best decision for your students for instruction and not worry about if I do this, I'll lose funding, or if I do this, it will gain me more funding. Next slide, please. So many of you know and are very, very aware because of the work that you do, the way we do funding right now, attendance is either half day or whole day. And we know that because we have children sitting in our school and we see them there and check there. We know that they're there, and we understand checkouts and how that works. We also have performance-based funding. Of course, performance-based funding, you don't really get credit for that until the completion at the end. So, and if that doesn't happen, you're not going to get your funding. Then we have the non-traditional instruction under our current model. And that non-traditional instruction was really only intended to be used for 10 days, first of all. So only 10 days. And that works more on a participation type level. And we work with the Office of Continuous Improvement and Support and rely upon them to look at participation based upon what school districts submit. And then they kind of give us the green light. Yes, they get 2 days of NTI or 3 days of NTI. Again, that maximum was only 10. And we know that there is a probability, maybe a probability that we may need more than 10 for the future in the next school year. Transportation is always a consideration and component of funding. And we know that when we finished the school year, one of the concerns of local school districts was knowing that they may not be transporting as many students. Under that, everyone is at an NTI model. And so that was a concern on how it would impact your funding, a valid concern. You may actually do the same number of routes this year, depending on what that model looks like in your district. Or you may have fewer routes. But we know right now transportation is a big component and concern for local school districts. And then finally, growth. How does that work? We do have some school districts that are achieving growth. Many, however, are either flat in their growth or actually losing enrollment. So that's something else that we keep high on our priority for consideration. Next slide, please. And then finally, logistics. From a logistics standpoint, Infinite Campus, as many of you are already aware, and in fact, you've probably been talking about that with Rhonda and her team. Infinite Campus is trying to make some adjustments to their system so that we have a way that we can actually count both in-person and remote attendance. Whatever we come up with, training will also be at the forefront. You know, anytime that we roll out something new and different, it is a lift to be able to get everyone on the same page of how it works under the new way. And of course, as you all deal in data, you all are experts in data every single day. You know, there's always that risk that data will not be as clean as all of us would like, because we're in kind of a quick pace to get everyone on the same page and understanding how it's going to work in the future. So that is a risk. You know, the more complicated we make it, the harder it is for people, even with the best of intentions, to really comply and make sure that we're all doing the right thing. And then finally, SAR and SEEK systems, two older systems here at the Department of Education, and we are always concerned about how much we can actually utilize them when we start making a lot of changes. And so that is something else that we keep in the forefront. Even with the changes from Senate Bill 177, a lot of the calculations are having to be done manually, just because SEEK and SAR are not really designed for what Senate Bill came up with, even though that was really helpful. So I've run quickly through this presentation of things that we are thinking about, but really would like to spend a few minutes with your participation on things that DPPs are concerned about. And I would also invite you to weigh in, because I took this to the Superintendent's Advisory Council on Monday, and then at the Superintendent's webcast Tuesday, I also did the same presentation and invited comment. I will share with you from both of those presentations. We heard some conversations about moving to a membership model. So that was one thought that we heard from some people. We also heard some thoughts from people about taking that Senate Bill 177 language and just sort of shifting it forward for one more year. And as we think of the goals we're trying to achieve, that would hit many of the goals of predictability and easy to explain, and the things that we saw on the earlier slides. But I will share with you, and this is where DPPs can really help us. As we talk about both of those as funding models, it really does put us on a path that we are no longer connecting attendance to funding. And I will share with you, as I've presented in front of the legislative body, there are questions and concerns about if we move to that for a long period of time, like the whole school year, how do we ensure that students are really receiving that instruction? Because I think in the past, the thought was, if you get a student inside your school building, you have the best opportunity to educate that child. And when we are remote learning, I think there will be a desire to have some way to ensure and report out to families, constituents, legislators, how we know, how we can verify that contact is happening with our students, and that students are receiving the benefit of the instruction. So I put that out from really specifically to this group, because I think you can help us really come up with some evidence, or ways that we can have evidence to say, this is how we know every student is being engaged or contacted or participating. I'm going to stop there for just a minute and look for any questions or comments.
Evan, this is Jessie. Would you like me to read through them, or would you like to just roll through them?
You can read through them if you want, or just kind of pitch them to me.
Okay. All right. Well, the first one we have is, they're kind of asking about next year. Do we know when we will know? It's kind of trying to decide when will we know what our plan is?
Yeah, so This is the last kind of feedback call that we're doing. Like I said, I actually did this presentation in front of the finance officers this morning. So DPPs are the last group that we're really trying to seek your input and feedback. We can make decisions, but we feel it's really important that you have the voice and the opportunity to express what you think. So you are the last group that is on my calendar to make sure that I hit and ask for your input. And we do understand how important the timeliness of this decision is, because it's hard for you to make decisions on what your school year is going to look like without knowing this. The other thing that I'll just share with you is we then have to turn to how we effectuate whatever we decide. Since the General Assembly won't be back in session until January, typically the General Assembly, like they did with Senate Bill 177, would be weighing in on this and making those determinations. But we have heard from local school districts, and I think through the governor's emergency power and our ability to enter into executive orders, that is our goal, to advise and inform through that process until the General Assembly can come back in January and weigh in. So I would say in the next, and I hate to give a time frame because I don't have complete control over that, but I would say in the next week or two, we will know.
Okay. I'm not seeing any other questions or comments that have come in right now. Oh, hold on. We just got one. Let's see if we can push this over here. Okay, let's see. Just a thought. I think every DPP in the state would still use attendance policies and hold students and families accountable for attending school regularly, but could be funded by the state for ADM instead of ADA.
So I'd love to hear more about how you envision attendance working for students that are remote learning but do not have access to technology for whatever reason. So these are your students that are, we're sending home paper and pencil packets and they're completing work, and yet we're still trying, how will we still capture their attendance on an instructional day basis? If anybody has any thoughts or feedback on that, I'd love to hear it, because we've kind of wrestled with that one just a little bit. Okay, I don't see anything else being populated. I'm going to go ahead and stay on the call for the rest of your meeting. So if anyone thinks of anything, if you can please publish in the chat. And if you have any questions, we'll try to circle back to those also at the end. But I really appreciate your time and being able to share just some things that we have in our mind as we're looking forward to try to help districts as they kick off the new school year and kind of settle this issue of attendance and funding. Thank you, Rhonda, and I'll turn it back to you.
Thank you, Robin, for your time. I really appreciate that. We can go to the next slide. Okay, and we've been talking a lot about the variable calendar, and I think most people understand the proportional part of the variable contract calendar. Now I think the new question comes into play with employment and hours and contracts. So just to clarify, if the variable instruction calendar, the statute says if you start instruction on the Monday closest to the 26th, it waives the 170 days, but requires districts to meet the 1,062 hours of instruction. So an example would be if you have 165 school days with 1,062 hours of instruction, and you have a 185-day contract for teachers, they would need to work 15 days over and above the 165 to meet their 185-day contract. So the 165 then is proportional to 170. Instruction can only be 7 hours per day, plus then you would have lunch and recess and maybe homeroom, and that's not instructional time. You can front load your calendars to start teacher work days prior to the Monday closest to the 26th, but just make sure instruction does not start until that Monday, which would be August 24th this year. Since The KRS 158070, it doesn't distinguish between certified and classified employment contracts. Both certified and classified employees with contracts based on the school term will receive the 170-day credit toward their required contract days when the school district completes the 1,062 hours. So then the question remains for contracts that are hourly. And the KRS 158070, the contract staff based on hourly time get paid actual hours worked, and it's not proportional. So they only get paid for the hours that they've worked. And I think that clears up some of the questions. I've been speaking with a lot of different DPPs about that, so hopefully that'll help answer that. Next slide, please. Okay, some other things to consider that we've been talking about and been on phone calls with different DPPs, and some of the things that we've been talking about is attendance tracking. And we're still working on ways to make Infinite Campus work, with some students working from home while others are in school. And one idea that I wanted to share, I was speaking with a DPP yesterday, and he was telling me that they're going to put all of their students in middle and high school on performance-based. Half will come Monday, Wednesday, the other half will come Tuesday, Thursday, keeping everything performance-based, but physically coming to school for teacher-directed lessons and help. And then Fridays, they're going to use those days for the students that need extra help. This gives them face time with their teacher, less students in the building, and the classroom and buses as well. And then also has that individualized time on Fridays for the kids that need help. And then once those students pass, they'll get their 100% attendance credit for their time. So I thought that was a really good idea, and I wanted to share that. Some of the other things we wanted to talk about, performance-based courses. So if you have them on performance-based, that doesn't mean that they can't come into the school. So they can still come into the school for lessons, but you can keep them on performance-based. So if you choose performance-based, and even if they decide later for seat time, you can still leave them in performance-based until they've finished for the year. So you don't have to bounce back and forth, and it makes life a lot easier for your counselors and people that make their schedules and so forth. And then the standard-based grading, we still don't really have a great way to work with Infinite Campus for the younger students, like K through 3. So we're still working with them on that. And the other area of concern was home hospital. We've been talking about really a couple of different scenarios that could work for home hospital. So let's say you have a student that is ill and they have a note from a physician, and there's the home hospital committee, and they've decided that this student really should be on home hospital. Then that would be your traditional home hospital, and they would have 2 visits, 1 hour per visit, each visit every 5 days of school. And they've got their physician's notes and everything in their folder, then that would be home hospital. If you have a student that may have been exposed to COVID, but they're not really sick, they could then be put on more of a virtual schedule where they're not on home hospital, but they would meet virtually, meet with a teacher, maybe have contact and do some work packets if they don't have computer. Almost like an NTI type setup for those students, but not be on home hospital. And then you have students that could also be put on performance-based, and they could get the credit when they finish at the end of the year. So they could start on performance-based. Let's say they're feeling better, they can come back to school, and they're coming in and having seat time, but you can still keep them on performance-based for the rest of the year. So those are a few different things that we've been talking about, different ideas. And the other thing I wanted to mention, I had another question: can one home hospital teacher work with 4 or 5 students at a time? That goes against what we have in statute. We've made changes to home hospital which make those visits virtual or telephonic if need be, but you still have to have that one-on-one time, 2 visits every 5 days for an hour each visit, and you can't do that with multiple students at one time. So that doesn't really go, it goes against what the statute says for home hospital. But you could do that if you were just working with them virtually and they weren't on home hospital. The last thing that I wanted to mention was Healthy at School. And we have Angela Mcdonald, who is our nurse consultant. She's been working very closely with DPH, and I wanted to give her a few minutes just to tell everyone where they're at and what they're doing, and then we'll open it up for more questions. Okay, Angie?
Thank you, everyone. We have been having 2 to 3 times a week meetings with the Department of Public Health, trying to get the Healthy at School guidance finalized and finished. We're very close. From what I understand, that there's a few things that kind of need to be tweaked, and then it's going to the governor and lieutenant governor's office for final approval. But we've had representatives from the Department of Public Health speak at our weekly superintendent's conference calls, and the Education Continuation Task Force, whatnot, to kind of give us some highlights of what we see is going to be in that final guidance. One thing that we can kind of be sure of is that it's going to be recommended that all students wear a mask, a cloth mask. There will be exceptions for those with disabilities or underlying health conditions that would prevent them from wearing a mask, sensory or behavioral type things that they may not be able to tolerate. So those provisions are in there as well. So we've really thought we would get a lot of kickback, and we did it first, but I think everyone's kind of beginning to understand the importance of wearing masks. The big thing is going to be to try to spread out your students as much as possible. If you can do a 6 feet apart setting in your classroom and people are not up moving, then it is acceptable to let them take their mask down. If you can spread them out in the room to do, reading and independent things, then that will be acceptable to do so. But if you're doing a small group at the table or small reading groups or whatnot, then everybody, of course, is going to need to wear a mask. Eating in the cafeteria, as long as everyone's wearing a mask going through line and that sort of thing, it can be done in the cafeteria if you are spaced out 6 feet apart, doing assigned seatings, so it kind of helps with the contact tracing portion. And students will be able to take their masks off to eat, of course, but then they'll be asked to put them back on when you're transitioning in the hallways back to classrooms. One thing that we're encouraging districts to do is to start thinking about a separate isolation area for your students who are exhibiting COVID symptoms. We don't want kids who just come for routine daily medications or medical treatments like blood sugar checks or whatnot to get exposed needlessly in the nurse's office. So start thinking about if there is a place that you can have those students wait until they are picked up by their parents or guardians, and that who could supervise that area. It'll be very important to do that. Temperature checks is going to be an option, is going to be something that's going to have to happen. We're still trying to get definitive answers as whether they need to be on the bus or at school entry. And we hope to have that in our final guidance as well. Commissioner Kenny, have I left off anything of the big points that you can think of?
No, I think you've hit a lot of them, Angie. Thank you.
Okay, so those are kind of the high points. Once we have that guidance, I'm working on a companion piece for the school nurses to kind of get a little more out there in the weeds, to address a lot of the questions that they've been having for me. One is that there's been a lot of concern is whether the immunization or physicals and that type of thing requirement has been waived for the year, and that's not the case. They are still required. We are asking you not to just keep kids out of school because they don't have it, because it's been hard for some parents to do that. They still may not be comfortable sitting in the doctor's office or whatnot. So please start working with your families to get those. There's not going to be any penalty from KDE if they're turned in late or that sort of thing. You know, we're not going to be the police about that. Also, we're not going to be the mask police. You know, we just expect everybody to do their best effort. But, you know, we're here to support you and not to be the bad guys, so to speak. So as soon as we have final guidance, I will be planning a conference call with the district health coordinators and school nurses so we can roll this out to them and start handling any more of their questions or things that they may need, or you can think that they may need that we can help you with. Feel free to put those in the Q&A box, that we're here to help, and we'll do anything we can to support our school nurses. So if anyone has any questions, I'm happy to field them.
Thank you so much, Angie. So if anyone has any questions, Jesse has the chat open and we can hopefully address anything that you still have questions about.
And I think we have a few things going back to Robin's discussion. So the first comment is, following the model for daily participation for NTI days is useful. Also, grades being tied to attendance through performance-based coursework can be utilized at a high school level. So that was one comment on asking for suggestions. And then the other one says, perhaps IC could be modified to allow a supervising teacher to mark a student as virtually present instead of present or absent, and authorize them to mark each day as such based on equivalency of work completed.
Both of those are really good comments. Thank you. We have been talking about maybe there are different ways that we can do participation and kind of strengthen that a little bit. So maybe a combination between the ability to check an Infinite Campus, and I do think there will be a desire for that daily participation look. And we've also talked about the performance-based coursework. So all those things that are things that we have also been discussing. So I'm pleased to hear that at least we're thinking in the same direction.
Okay, I'm trying to scroll through here and get all of Robin's questions together in case she has to jump off. So forgive me if I skip your question. We'll be back to it, I promise. Wouldn't the student be counted as present when he or she turns in their daily virtual assignment? I think that goes back to some of the options we're trying to look at and see.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so for virtual, those students that are on technology and your teacher can, you know, pretty much validate that they've either been online in a Zoom meeting or and I shouldn't say a Zoom meeting, another type of online meeting, or if they have some way to validate that each day through technology, I think that makes perfect sense. I mean, that is no more of a heightened requirement than if they're in person sitting in your classroom. It's really, we're still trying to think through those students that maybe have to use that paper and pencil. Seems to be the one that I think we'll get there. It's just that it's a little more challenging to figure out what that would look like from a participation and the validation of it. And then the other part is how do we audit that? How do we make sure, and who's going to do that so that we can all stand behind whatever information is provided and say, we know this because here's the audit to prove it. So that's the other thing that I think we all have to think about collectively.
Okay. There's another one on that line talking about, their district appears to be one-on-one on devices, but like I said, you've spoke to the issue with the districts who are not.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. So we're going to try and combine these two. It says, are 100% online students going to be treated as performance-based because we don't get ADA for them unless they pass, or has that been defined yet?
Yeah, I don't think that necessarily has to be the case. I think as we think through it, if there's some way that we can come up with a way to validate that participation, again, through the camera to make sure, or personal contact, or something that allows us through that technology submission of something online to show that we do have that participation. I think we can treat them more like, for funding purposes, as if they are sitting in the classroom. I think that's possible. At least the recommendation that we go forth.
Right, and that answers the next question of students who are on a virtual for a short window and they're coming back, but they haven't completed the course. That's what we're trying to figure out, is that hybrid system to track them wherever they are, if they're coming in and out.
Yeah, because we really don't want to have one way to track them. Ideally, we would come up with something that tries to treat all students and kind of the lift by teachers the same. Try not to make it a lot harder, but it's just challenging with more the remote students, especially the ones that don't have those technology devices to really help with that effort.
Okay, all right. Well, this may bleed back over into Rhonda a little bit. Can you only do performance-based at middle and high school? Any suggestions for elementary if you cannot do that, performance-based at elementary?
I think with the elementary, the biggest challenge with trying to use performance-based, a lot of the students, they have to show mastery before they can move on to the next thing. How would you do a standard-based grading style with the elementary students with performance-based? It'd be very difficult. And so I think that is one of the areas that we are working with Infinite Campus right now to try to figure out how can we, what can we put together that we could be able to assess and track these younger students. K through 3 is where we see the biggest challenge.
Okay. Should we go ahead and submit a variable calendar if we've already got a traditional calendar approved?
You don't have to if you've already gotten your calendar approved and then you decide to use a variable calendar, you can just then amend your calendar at the end of the year to show what's actually happened. Now, if you already have that approved, that would be, I think, beneficial so that you have everything in place for the school year, but you don't have to resubmit an original calendar if it's already been submitted and approved.
Okay, this is a very specific scenario with variable calendar and hours. So Matt, we may need to just reach back out to this district at the end. If a school chooses to do a variable calendar and still decides to go 7 hours a day and 175 days, it would put the district at 1,225 hours. Would the teachers on 185 contract days still only have to work 10 more days like they would if you had 165 days of instruction, 7 hours a day, and 1,155 hours of instruction?
Well, they would have to reach their 185. So if they've already, wouldn't it then be whatever amount of days they work, and then you would have the additional 15?
I'm thinking they're probably alluding to those teacher equivalency hours that they sometimes get when the days go a little bit longer and those bank together. So I think we may have to, there's a lot in that question. So, and it's from the requester is anonymous. So if you could attach maybe your name and district to that, we can reach out to you directly to work through that very specific scenario. So, okay. For an alternating pattern with schools, would this require a performance-based enrollment?
Right now it would. We're still working with Infinite Campus, so if we come up with a better way to track, and I think we are looking at some type of participation scenario where we can do something a little bit more inventive, then we'll let you know. But right now, I think if you had the alternating schedule and you put everyone on performance-based, then you would get all of your attendance credit when those kids pass. So at the present time, that's probably the best way to proceed. But if we do get something together with Infinite Campus that works differently, of course, we'll let you know right away, and then you can also address that at that time.
Okay, sorry, I clicked and lost my questions. Sorry. All right. I'm sorry, guys. Okay, our variable calendar shows 164 days of instruction plus the additional 15 days beyond the 170. This makes my calendar only 169 days in calendar summary. What happens when I submit my calendar?
We don't have a stop on it. I think it would look at the amount of hours to make sure that you're meeting the instruction time. Jesse, correct me if I'm wrong. I don't think they'll have a problem submitting their calendar.
But I'm going to pull Josh in on this one. I think that's where to get to that 170 days, so it'll process, you can put in a teacher equivalency day that those would make up. Is that correct, Josh?
Yes, that's correct. Or you can use your G planning day.
Right. That would get you to that 170 days, so the calendar would register.
Thank you.
Okay. Let's see. Would it be an option for all students to be enrolled as performance-based during the fall semester, with some opting to come in person and others participating in only virtual learning?
I don't see why we couldn't. Jesse, do you want to comment on that? It's basically the same scenario where you could still have kids on performance-based, virtual-based, getting that 100% attendance when they pass, but they could still come into the school, go to different lessons, and so forth. So just because they come into the school doesn't mean that they can't be on performance-based courses.
Correct. That's what I would say. It doesn't mean that you can't be present just because you're in a performance-based course.
We've even had the students on virtual. Sometimes they'll have to come in for a little help or take an assessment. That's fine.
Okay. All right. How do you make sure a student meets the 1062 hours on performance-based, or does that not apply to them?
I don't know how to answer that, because that's going to be in their schedule. So you'll have your calendar set up, you'll load those classes into the schedule, and then when they pass, all of that attendance credit then goes towards that schedule that they have in their calendar, which should add up to 1,062. So it kind of fills in the calendar. So it has to be set up correctly for the schedule, and so that they get their hours once they pass, and the system will calculate that.
If you had a full student on performance-based and it was the 7 hours a day, when you passed, you would fill up those entire 7 hours a day with that credit, which would, translate to the 1062.
Right. And remember the Carnegie units of time too with the performance-based.
Okay. All right. I think I'm going to transfer over to Jalen now and let him start. There's some questions in the news section that he can pull over and ask, because I'm going to have to hop off and go to another meeting. Sorry, guys.
Thank you, Jesse. We appreciate it.
All right, so I'm going to publish the new questions real quick and move them over, and then I'll start reading them off for you.
Okay, thank you.
Where'd she stop? Right here. All right, the first one, is there a good likelihood that the number of allowable NTI days will be expanded beyond the standard 10 in the near future? If so, do we have any idea how many days we may get?
That is really will depend on what happens as far as the pandemic. And that would be something that would have to be legislatively changed, where we'd have to go to the governor for an emergency order. At this time, we only have 10, but the commissioner did say that we'll do whatever we need to do to support the schools. So at this point in time, we have 10 NTI days, but if there anything changes with the pandemic, I'm sure that we will address everyone's needs and add more NTI days.
Hey, Rhonda, if I can jump in for just a minute on that question. Typically, I think what Rhonda has said is exactly correct, although I do think that the commissioner is very strongly considering the use of the emergency powers of the governor and the executive order process to go ahead and grant more NTI days, because we just expect that's going to be needed rather than waiting until the General Assembly comes in. And you know, while we would prefer to do that, General Assembly is not really scheduled to come back in until January. There was some talk of a special session that could always happen a little bit later, but we do recognize the importance of districts having this need to know. So I had talked about, you know, in the next week or two to seeing maybe something roll out on attendance and funding. And I think the NTI issue will likely be addressed in that same method, whatever that shapes up to be.
Thank you, Robin.
You're welcome.
All right, next question is, scroll back up. The school planning PB for middle and high, what if the students don't come on Monday, Wednesday, or Tuesday, Thursday they are scheduled?
That would be really a district decision on how they handle that. You know, I would say that I don't know what kind of repercussions they would have. They'd have to put something in their policy to address that and have that up front with the students before they had that in their schedule.
How will the state conduct district attendance reviews for next year?
We are currently thinking about that, and we still have our rotation with districts on a 5-year rotation. They could still do some of their attendance reviews, and some things are going to have to change along with the changes that we make for this school year. So that would really just depend on when everything is finalized, how we would put that in place. I'm actually working with Sheila and Ruth and Scott right now, presently, to address their attendance review form and get that up to speed with our new pupil attendance manual that we're also updating. So when we figure out how we're going to be doing things with Infinite Campus, then we can, at that time, present what we can do differently for the attendance review form. And as always, we send out the form before we ever come, so districts aren't blindsided. They know what we're going to be looking for and how we're going to be conducting our attendance reviews.
How would students that are performance-based be accounted for if the student transfers to another district prior to completion of the course?
So what we had talked about, giving them the final grade before they leave, so that the school that they're in gets the attendance credit for the part of the class that they've passed, and then they'll go to their other school district and then fill in for the remainder of the year. When they pass, that school will then get the attendance credit for what they pass at that school. So before they leave, they would get if they pass, they would get their final passing grade for that amount of time.
Okay. See, on a variable calendar, do you have to stop at 1,062 hours, or can you end up with more hours? To clarify the earlier question, is a teacher's contract automatically at 170 days once the 1,062 hour mark has been reached?
I'll let Matt help me with this, but if they are on a variable calendar, then they have that 170-day proportional 1,062. If they go over that, that's really a district, that's fine. They can go over that amount of time. And then, but it's still proportional to 170, so they would still have to put in their additional 15 days if they're on a 185 contract. And Matt, I'll let you help me with that if that's not correct.
I think that's correct. I need to I need to think through that. So if we just put a pin in that, we can get a written response back to whoever wrote it and put it in our answers to the follow-up questions. So.
Okay, thank you very much.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, the districts still will get credit when students don't pass, but not with performance-based courses, correct?
If they have a failing grade in a performance-based class, they will get no attendance credit. That is correct. And that's really the downside and probably why you would want to have some time for the students to come to school and have that time with the teacher and lessons and so forth. So that doesn't change. If they don't pass and they don't get any attendance credit for that course.
So if the students at the middle and high school are enrolled in performance-based classes, their teachers mark them present every day in Infinite Campus, or do you even do attendance?
At this point in time, you don't have to do attendance, it would just be performance-based. Well, we are looking at a blended model where we're working with Infinite Campus. We're not quite there yet, but we are coming close with a way to work with maybe a whole day, half day attendance, and then seat time and coming in, or performance-based and still taking attendance. So we're still working with Infinite Campus, and we'll let you know as soon as we have that worked out. But I believe that we're getting close to figuring out a way to have a blended school day and taking attendance and giving credit for, so if a student comes in on Monday, but they're working at home on Tuesday, that they have a participation attendance type grade or attendance taken for the participation for the time that they're at school. So that's what we're looking at doing right now. So we'll be able to address that better as soon as we get that finalized, hopefully next week.
This one's fairly similar to that. Is if students are performance-based, do they need a set day to come in, or on an as-needed option with staff monitoring their work daily?
If they're on performance-based, then it's really a district decision on how they want to do that. Because performance-based, they don't actually have to come in. So as long as they take the class and do the time and do the work, and then when they pass, they get their attendance credit.
And then this is anonymous, but they were basically asking, could you speak on some creative hybrid systems that some schools have spoken to you about? Someone might not have at this point either.
Well, I think the model that I spoke with, I thought that was a really great way to have kids coming Monday, Wednesday, and then another group Tuesday, Thursday, and then Friday being the days that they work a little bit more in one-on-one with students that are struggling, and then getting that attendance credit for the performance-based when they pass. I thought that was, so far, really, that's the best that I've heard. I've also heard of different districts doing a AM and PM rotation. That's really all that I've heard. So everyone's still kind of trying to figure out how they're going to put their days together. I would really think that reaching out to a DPP in your area and working with other DPPs together to kind of come up with, I don't want to say just a regional idea, but maybe if you're working with a district close to you, that you can bounce ideas off one another and come up with different strategies, would be a really good thing to do.
Can you remind us about time? If we change the times due to using a variable calendar, what exactly doesn't count as instructional time? I'm thinking there are some rules around passing time that I can't remember.
Passing time is part of your instructional day. So you usually get your 5 minutes for passing, and that is part of that's part of your instructional time. I had someone ask me about physical education and if that was included, and that's really a content standards question that we don't really touch upon that. But the passing time, and that is part of your instructional time. So if you go to class from 8 to 8:55 and then you have the 5 minutes to get to your next class, then that full hour then would go for would be one instructional hour.
Are districts looking at reducing classified contracts due to a variable instruction calendar?
That is really district to district. Some of your smaller districts may be doing things differently than your larger districts would be doing. One concern was having an aide on every bus taking temperatures and things. That's going to actually the need for more help than less help. And then we have some smaller districts that already have aides that ride the buses, and it doesn't even affect their employment. So it really just depends on the district and what they have in place.
And is anyone planning on trying to have all students every day?
I don't really know. I know that I spoke with a DPP this morning, and I think they're looking at more of a seat time every day situation, but they're going to use the variable calendar. So I have had some tell me that they are going to be just, seat time. And once again, it just depends on the district.
Okay, well, that is all the new questions I have.
Okay.
Hey, Rhonda.
Yes.
With performance-based courses, if a student withdraws before final grade is posted, would you lose that portion of funding for that student during that time?
It would be advisable then to put in a grade for them for the amount of time. So I would put a passing grade in before they left, and then you would get credit. You'd get attendance credit for the amount of time they were in school. If you don't, then you won't get any credit. So that really hasn't changed. That's the same as it's been. And going back to passing time, and Josh, correct me if I'm wrong, you can only have the one passing time, so you can't claim 2 5-minute passing times for one instructional time, correct?
That is correct.
Yeah, so I wanted to mention that as well.
We did get one more. It's, I guess, more of a comment, but keeping track of students in the building on performance-based is a challenge. If attendance is not tracked and there is an emergency, such as active shooter or fire, there's no way to tell who is actively in the building. Same for those who may have come into contact with another student who has COVID. It'd be critical for Infinite Campus to develop a workaround.
And these are some things that we have been talking about. So we're really aware of the challenges, and we're just trying to come up with the best ways to meet everyone's needs and still be safe. So we are aware of that, but that's a great comment, and it's a concern that we've been addressing.
And is performance-based basically the same as virtual learning?
Virtual is, yes, you're not, and you're somewhere else taking classes, and correct me on this one, Josh. And then performance, you can either be in a school or at home, but virtual, most of the time when you hear virtual, those are kids that are maybe taking a college class somewhere else.
Virtual is 100% online with 100% teacher online. They have no with the school district. I mean, it's all completely offline. I'm sorry, online, off campus.
Thank you.
Got two more that just came in. Going back to the email we received this morning, if food service staff, for example, work by hour 180 days, would the scenario be they work 28 days more than the teachers working 152 days on a variable calendar situation?
Is there a question on that, or is it because the hourly would be paid hourly as they normally would? Then the contracts that are under contract for the year, such as a teacher, would then be paid proportionally for the 170 or 185, 170 plus their 15 extra days, or in some cases it's 18 extra days because some schools have longer than 185 on their contracts.
And this one says, please elaborate on like V/performance based. I don't know what the V might stand for. Virtual. Okay.
Performance.
How can you not put in a grade when the course has not been completed?
Well, they could assess them up to that point. Am I right, Josh? And then they would put in a grade for that time. Especially if they, at the end of the semester, put in a grade, and then they would get credit for that time.
Yes, that's something that we have been working on and thinking on. Jesse and I and you have been working on that since all this has started. As of right now, that's what we're having districts to do, is put that grade in there, and then that the next district that they go to, well, they'll actually finish enrolling them in that same course.
Mm-hmm. And finish up their studies, and then they either pass or fail that portion at the other district.
Students who are on performance-based classes, wouldn't they still have a schedule in Infinite Campus that they follow on the 2 days they are actually in the building? If so, we would know where they are at all times when they are present.
Okay, I'm not sure if that's really a question or just a comment. And once again, we are working on ways on how we're going to be doing this. So we're aware of attendance and tracking and knowing where students are in the building and so forth. So that's one of the biggest challenges that we have at this time, especially for the elementary students. Were there any other questions?
No, that was it so far.
Okay. And please feel free to reach out to me through email. Most of you have my cell phone number, so you can call me on my cell, or you have my work number. If you dial my work number and put in my extension, it automatically goes to my cell, so I'll get your call. But send me an email, and then I will either tell you the answer or find out the correct answer and then get back to you, or at least forward you to the correct person. And we'll get back with you on the questions for variable calendar as far as if you work longer than the 1062 and what that would do. If no one else has anything else, we'll conclude our meeting today, and appreciate everyone's time, and we'll get the Q&A out to you as soon as we can, as well as the recording for this meeting. So thank you again.